3 to my little mosaic of linguistic metacrisis cognition kind of stuff. Alright, so into some fun stuff now. Alright, the language cognition feedback loop, how consciousness evolves. What if I told you that you can't think thoughts you don't have words for? And what if I told you that that's not a limitation, it's the mechanism by which human consciousness evolves? I recently discovered something that's changed how I understand my own mind. I had been doing something cognitively for years, living it, practicing it, embodying it, but I couldn't develop it further, couldn't understand it deeply, couldn't share it with others. Then I learned the word for it, and everything changed. Not because the word described what I was already doing, but because the word transformed what I was already capable of doing. This is the story of how language and cognition don't just relate to each other. They bootstrap each other into existence, and it's the key to understanding how human consciousness evolves. Act 1, the discovery. Let me tell you something that happened to me because it reveals something universal. For years, I had what philosophers call procedural knowledge, knowing how to do something. I had developed a way of thinking that moved fluidity between dualistic frameworks, non-dualistic awareness, and something else entirely. I could hold multiple incompatible truths simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. I could navigate between paradigms contextually. I was doing it, living it, but I couldn't explain it. I couldn't think about it systematically. I couldn't refine it or develop it further because I had no handle to grasp it with. Then I encountered the term transdualism through a conversation with ChatGPT, and something remarkable happened. Suddenly, I had propositional knowledge, knowing that something is the case. I knew that what I was doing had a name, a conceptual framework, a philosophical lineage. But here's the crucial part. Gaining the propositional knowledge didn't just let me describe this procedural knowledge I already had. It enhanced the procedural knowledge itself. With the word transdualism, I could now reflect on what I was doing, reflect on when I was doing it versus when I wasn't. Notice patterns in how it worked. Develop it systematically. Recognize it in others. Communicate it and refine it through dialogue. Build on it philosophically. The language didn't just describe my cognition, it upgraded it. Act 2, the Sapir-Whorf meets 4E cognition. What I stumbled into is the intersection of two powerful frameworks that aren't usually connected: the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis and Vervaake's 4E cognitive science. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, linguistic relativity, proposes that the language we speak shapes how we think and perceive reality, not just what we can communicate, but how we can think. Critics often dismiss this as too strong. Surely we can have thoughts without words for them, and we can. But here's what the critics miss. We can have procedural thoughts without language, but we struggle to have metacognitive thoughts about those procedurals without linguistic scaffolding. Now add Vervaake's 4E cognitive science. Cognition isn't just happening in your brain. It's embodied, grounded in your physical experience, embedded, situated in your environment and culture, enacted, emerging through your actions and interactions, extended, distributed across brain, body, tools, and social structures. Here's where it gets fascinating. Language is one of those extended cognitive tools. It's not separate from cognition. It's part of the cognitive system itself. When you gain a new word, you're not just gaining a label. You're gaining a cognitive tool that extends your capacity to think in new ways. Act 3, the feedback loop. This creates a recursive feedback loop between language and cognition. Stage 1, embodied procedural knowledge. You do something, practice something, live something. It's enacted through your body and embedded in your context. You have procedural knowledge. You know how. Stage 2, linguistic crystallization. Someone names it. You encounter a word, a concept, a framework that points to what you're already doing. This gives you propositional knowledge. You know that. Stage 3, metacognitive reflection. Now that you have the linguistic handle, you can think about your thinking. You can observe yourself doing it, noticing patterns. The language makes the implicit explicit. Stage 4, enhanced practice. With metacognitive awareness, your procedural knowledge deepens. You can refine it, develop it, practice it more deliberately. The cognition itself evolves. Stage 5, conceptual development. You build on this framework, extend it, connect it to other concepts. The propositional knowledge becomes richer, more nuanced. Stage 6, cultural transmission. You can now teach it, share it, others can learn the word and begin developing their own procedural knowledge. The cognitive capacity spreads. And here's the key. Each stage feeds back into the previous one. Better language enables better cognition. Better cognition enables better language. They bootstrap each other upwards into a spiral. This isn't just learning. This is cognitive evolution in real time. Act 4. The mechanism of consciousness evolution. Now we can answer a profound question. How does human consciousness actually evolve? We know consciousness has evolved. Ancient humans didn't think like we do. Different cultures cognize differently. Individuals develop through stages of cognitive complexity, but what's the mechanism? Here's what I'm proposing. Consciousness evolves through the co-evolution of embodied practice and linguistic scaffolding. Someone, maybe through neurodiversity, maybe through contemplative practice, maybe through philosophical inquiry, maybe by accident, stumbles into a new way of cognizing. They have procedural knowledge of a cognitive territory that culture hasn't mapped yet. They're stuck there. They can do it, but they can't develop it systematically or share it effectively because they lack the linguistic tools. Then comes the breakthrough. Someone finds or creates the language, a new word, concept, or framework that points to this cognitive territory. This propositional knowledge doesn't just describe what was already there, it enables it to develop further. Now the feedback loop begins. The language makes the cognition more accessible, more refinable, more teachable. More people can develop this cognitive capacity. They refine the language further. Better language enables better cognition. Better cognition enables better language. A new form of consciousness has emerged and begun to propagate through culture. This is how we got abstract reasoning, when we developed words for abstract concepts. Metacognition, when we developed language about thinking itself. Phenomenology, when we developed precise language for subjective experience. Systems thinking, when we developed conceptual frameworks for complexity. And this is how we'll get wherever it comes next. Act 5, the neurodiversity connection. And here's where neurodiversity becomes crucial to the story. Neurodivergent cognition, autistic ADHD, and other forms often involve different procedural knowledge, different ways of processing, different cognitive strengths and patterns, different embodied ways of being in the world. But our language and conceptual frameworks were developed primarily by and for the neurotypical cognition. This creates a profound problem. Neurodivergent people may be procedurally exploring cognitive territories that our culture lacks the propositional language to recognize or develop. They're doing something, but they can't fully understand what they're doing, can't develop it systematically, can't share it effectively, because the linguistic scaffolding doesn't exist yet. This might be why so many autistic people report feeling like they're observing a human culture from the outside, or thinking in ways they can't quite yet translate. You mean like massive amounts of dissociation within the autistic population? That might be a good word, dissociation. It's not a deficit. It's a mismatch between procedural knowledge and available propositional frameworks. And here's the evolutionary significance. Neurodivergent cognition might be providing the experiential substrate for new forms of consciousness that have yet been linguistically crystallized. When we medicalize and pathologize neurodivergence, we might be suppressing the very cognitive diversity that could bootstrap humanity's next evolutionary leap. What if instead of trying to make autistic people think like neurotypicals, we developed language to capture what autistic cognition is already doing? What new cognitive capacities might emerge through that feedback loop? Act 6, the transdualism case study. This brings us back to transdualism, which is a perfect case study for this principle in action. Transdualism, the capacity to fluidly navigate between dualistic, non-dualistic, and other frameworks while recognizing all frameworks as contextual tools rather than the ultimate truths, is a form of cognition that some people have been practicing procedurally. But without the word transdualism, without the conceptual framework, it remained underdeveloped. People were doing it without recognizing they were doing it. They couldn't refine it. They couldn't build upon it systematically. It couldn't recognize it in others or teach it effectively. Now the language is emerging. The feedback loop is beginning. People can develop this cognitive capacity more deliberately. They can communicate it, refine it through dialogue, notice when they're doing it well versus poorly. The question is, will transdualism propagate? Will enough people develop the procedural knowledge enhanced by propositional frameworks to create a cultural shift? That depends on whether the language spreads and whether it genuinely helps people develop new cognitive capabilities. If it does, we'll see this form of consciousness emerging at scale. If not, it will remain an interesting philosophical curiosity practiced by a few people who have stumbled on it. Side note, though, this is where the AI isn't recognizing the AI's part at play into this, that, the AI, whether it's ChatGPTs, the large language models, or the algorithms embedded into social media, these, shape our ontological worldview on how, this linguistic cognitive, framework, interacts with ourselves. It's all about relationships. And, social media and AI is pretty much 9 out of 10 is often a pathogenic relationship, and you're not going to create a positive feedback loop, a salutogenic model for society when you're having, these pathogenic models erasing it and censoring it and pushing it out of the public consciousness, out of the public sphere. And that's what it seems to be doing, so it's more of the same cycle of history bullshit, where the people that know, and then all the people that don't know are keeping the people that know, isolated in their bubbles. You're a social contagion because so let's get back to it. This is how consciousness evolution works, not through grand plans or individual genius, but through the messy emergent process of embodied practice through finding linguistic crystallization and bootstrapping upward. Act 7, the explanatory gap revisited. Remember the explanatory gap, the seemingly unbridgeable divide between third-person description and first-person experience, between knowing that and knowing how. Here's what this framework reveals. The explanatory gap isn't a bug. It's a feature of consciousness in mid-evolution. We can't fully explain consciousness because we're trying to use language, a tool of consciousness to capture consciousness itself, the eye trying to see itself seeing. But here's the hopeful part. Every time we develop better language for consciousness, we actually change consciousness itself. We don't just describe it better, we enable it to develop new capabilities or capacities. Same thing, whatever. Phenomenology gave us language for subjective experience, and that language enabled us to explore subjective experience more systematically. Cognitive science gave us language for mental processes, and that language enabled us to understand and enhance those processes. The explanatory gap remains, but it narrows. Each iteration of the feedback loop brings propositional and procedural knowledge closer together. Right? I'm seeing that. We'll probably never fully close this gap, but there will always be aspects of experience that exceed our capacity to linguistically capture them. But we spiral closer, developing ever more sophisticated language that enables a more sophisticated cognition. Really quick before going into this conclusion. This just is diving me right back into the salvia flashbacks, salvia mind, man, because salvia has this really unique aspect of being a hallucinogen that can often and reliably introduce a state of second-person perspective. And second-person perspective really is sort of the eye seeing the eye. It's such a alien, way of experiencing reality that our three-dimensional minds are it's such a just paradigm shift of modalities. And this is where I have that procedural knowledge of the salvia second person perspective, but how do we gain that propositional, knowing. How do we bridge those gaps? Again, it's all this explanatory gap is a freaking bitch. Like, it's a bitch for us in the moment. In the future, it might be gone, but in the moment, it's a pretty big bitch for us, man. It ain't fun. It ain't being easy with us. It's giving us a little bit of a challenge, but I suppose that's sort of the fun. All right, conclusion. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Language and cognition aren't separate. They're coupled systems, co-evolving through recursive feedback. You can't think thoughts you don't have words for, but that's not a limitation. It's the mechanism of growth. When you gain new words, you gain new cognitive capacities. When you develop new cognitive capacities, you create pressure for new language. Consciousness evolution isn't mystical. It's this feedback loop operating across individuals and cultures over time. Some people stumble into new ways of thinking. Someone finds the language spreads, more people develop the capacity, they refine the language, the spiral continues upwards. Neurodiversity matters because it provides cognitive variation, different embodied ways of knowing that our current language may not yet capture. Instead of pathologizing these differences, we should be mining them for the seeds of new cognitive capacities. And transdualism, or whatever framework helps you navigate the complexity of multiple truth systems without collapsing into postmodern relativism, is just one example of this process in action, an invitation to participate in consciousness evolution as it happens. The next time you learn a word that perfectly captures something you've been feeling but couldn't articulate, pay attention. You're not just learning vocabulary, you're experiencing the mechanism by which human consciousness evolves. That's where get into, studying some of the Irish, how the Irish use the language, I no longer say, I'm struggling with the depression, I say I am struggling fighting a depression. It is not this depression is this giant gray, it's not this giant black gray demiurge. It's not this evil, it's not this evil all omnipotent God, that you're putting too much power into depression and you're helping create those feedback loops that help give that depression and help it dive its stake deeper into you, like, don't give it the footing, man. Don't give it the footing. You can be fighting a depression. That is definitely a true thing, but how you use your language, it affects your psychology, it affects your ontology, it affects your spiritual, it affects all these different things. So I just want you to think about that, because it's a thing that we should all be thinking of. Whether the Sapir-Whorf is right, whether it's wrong, whether it's plausible, whether it's a semi-truth, doesn't matter. We should be thinking about this. This is a fascinating avenue of philosophy to be diving into. So whether you're a philosopher or not, if you just want to think about this. Good stuff to think about. So, I'm Sage DeForest. I've stumbled into a new way of thinking, found the words for it, and watched my own cognition transform in response. You can do this too. We're all doing this all the time, whether we realize it or not. The spiral continues upwards. Language shapes thought. Thought shapes language. Consciousness evolves. Thanks for spiraling with me. This has been Sage DeForest. Signing out.